Welcome to the History of Ultimate in Minnesota podcast. In episode 3, James Huron sits down virtually with Eva Maxson and discusses her experiences with Ultimate in Belgium, Minnesota, and co-founding the Minnesota Strike. Hi everyone, my name is James Huron, using him, he, his pronouns, and today I'm talking with Eva Maxson. Eva, why don't you introduce yourself and give a brief overview of what you've done so far in Ultimate?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on your podcast and for interviewing me. My name is Eva Maxson, and I use she, her pronouns. I guess my very first exposure to Ultimate was a long time ago in Belgium, in Europe, where I grew up. And my parents would send me and my brother to extracurricular sports camps during Easter holiday, which was 2 weeks in the spring, and then Carnival holiday, which was about a week some other time during the year, and sometimes during the summer. So we would go there during the day, spend the whole day at this camp, and we would select 3 activities. And so one day I decided to choose Ultimate Frisbee and basketball or something, and then some other random activity. And that was my very, very first exposure to throwing a disc, I think. And those activities were led by Olivier Cassard, who founded the Mooncatchers, which is a pretty well-known Frisbee club in Belgium.
Cool. So that was your introduction to Ultimate. Let's see here. What other sports did you play around that same time period?
I played soccer for about 5 years through what was known as the Brussels Sports Association. So somehow, I think both my parents being English speaking and from other countries outside of Belgium, they were in contact with the expat group, the U.S. expat group, and also the British expat group. And so I played soccer through that association that offered soccer in the fall, and then basketball throughout the winter, and then softball in the spring. And so I went through a couple seasons of playing all 3 of those, and then focused on soccer mainly. And when I turned 16, I had the option to join a more serious club, and I think I tried it out for a few months, and it was just a lot. It was 3 practices a week and then matches on the weekend, and I didn't want to go down that route, so I stopped.
All right.
Yeah, basketball, soccer, and yeah.
Okay, so basketball, softball, and soccer. So you played Ultimate kind of as an extracurricular activity. When did you start playing for a team? Was it in school? Was it club?
That's a great question. So I would say, yeah, those activities that I just mentioned, I guess Ultimate was, let's see, I played it very, very informally in the park sometimes, and during those extracurricular moments, which would have been through middle school, but that only happened, a couple times a year maybe. And then when I was a junior in high school, so I was about 15 or 16, one of my friends and I were throwing in the park, and he mentioned that there was an actual club of Ultimate Frisbee near his house. And he said, yeah, it looks like a real sport or something, and they play it on this field. And so we thought it would be a fun idea to just show up at the sports club. And so the way it was formatted was you would just walk onto the practice field, at the time it seemed to start, and there would be about 40 people there of all, genders and ages, and then they would kind of split you up. I seem to remember, I think the first night I was there, they split us up depending on the level that we thought we had. And so I was a complete beginner, and was put with a group of beginners who were mostly men, mostly white folks. And then I just kept playing with them. I think it was once a week. And you signed up with the sports club. versus an actual team. So I was paying a yearly rate of, I can't remember what it was. And I asked my parents to pay for that, I think, at the time. And then I just went to practices and ended up being kind of recruited by this subgroup of the club, which was a team known as the Belette, which means it's a type of animal. I actually don't know what it is in English. But so I started playing with them, and they were all men except for me. And so I was, a 15, 16-year-old girl, and they were all in their mid-20s, I think, at the time. And we're also just starting the sport as well. So I felt like it was fun until I realized that I was part of the team just as a female persona and not as like they thought it would be fun to play with me as a person. So I felt a little bit used and not like my ability as a player wasn't being fully exploited in that environment. So after about a year of that, I stopped. And at that point I was a senior in high school and there's a lot of other stuff going on. So and I stopped for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that was like your initial club experience. That's never what anyone really should experience as far as what they get out of Ultimate. You shouldn't be like a token or a persona on the team. You definitely should be valued for who you are and your playing ability and all those other things. So I'm sorry to hear that happened, especially so early in playing Ultimate. I do have a question related to that. You have these other sports you played, and yet it was Ultimate that you ended up sticking with. So what was it about Ultimate that ended up keeping you around, I guess, when compared to like soccer, softball, or basketball?
That's a great question and something I haven't really thought about in a very long time. I think what turned me away from soccer initially was that I felt like the only option for me moving forward with soccer would have been to join this ultra competitive club. And I just I don't know, I didn't feel comfortable committing to all that time. I didn't feel comfortable with the seriousness of it, I think. And then just having the parents on the sideline constantly yelling and very involved in their kids' sports, and just, it wasn't an environment I really liked all that much. And then same thing for basketball and volleyball that I was also playing in middle school and high school for a while. It didn't feel like there were a ton of opportunities that weren't super, super serious. And we don't really have, or at least I wasn't aware of us having rec leagues as you might have here. So Ultimate was just kind of consistently something that I found that was both good exercise and I just had a really great time. And but as another factor, of course, were the friendships that I formed through Ultimate, which were really, really special. And I don't know if, I stuck with Ultimate because of the friendships or I formed such close friendships because I stuck with Ultimate, but all around I felt like it was a pretty good choice.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. So you ended up stopping playing in 2009, which would have been your basically your senior year in school for a number of reasons you said. When did you pick up playing Ultimate again?
So yeah, senior year of high school, I was trying to start making money by tutoring various subjects outside of school. That was taking a lot of time. I was also giving swimming lessons and kind of trying to focus on school and graduating high school with really good grades. And we don't have, I guess, we don't have, the public Belgian school system doesn't prepare you for any type of college admission exams because there are none in Belgium. I think there might be now admission exams for medical school, but I don't even think, I'm actually not sure if that's the case now. But anyway, back then there weren't, and engineering programs were the only ones that had you pass an entrance exam. And so, but my parents being both having gone to college in the US, thought it might be a good idea for me to take the SAT. And so my school wasn't offering any type of my school didn't know what the SATs were. So I had to go figure that out by myself and, get the books and put in that time on my own. So that was kind of an interesting experience for me because nobody else I knew was going through that process of applying to American colleges. And I applied to a bunch and sorry, I'm getting off topic a little bit, but
That's okay.
I applied to a few and, I got into a couple and then the price tag, popped up and it was just ridiculous. When you have the option of going to a college in the country where you grew up and you pay $800 a year for tuition versus, like $40,000 per year. My parents could not afford that. And it seemed like a silly idea. So ended up going to college in Belgium. So I guess all that being said, that took time away from ultimate possibilities in senior year of high school. So then going into college, I was excited to start playing a sport again. And I think I thought of the other sports too, but then I thought, well, maybe I'll just check if there's an ultimate team here. And so there was an ultimate team that I found through the college website that was on our on the medical school campus. And that was about an hour away by bus from my campus. And so on Monday nights, I I went there and I took this bus and there weren't many people on the bus. It's kind of like a Greyhound type bus. And showed up and it was just in this gym hall that was relatively small and there were like 6 people there or 7, mostly guys again. And that's kind of how I started playing Ultimate again in college. And there was no structure whatsoever to the practices. I think somebody would vaguely, guide us through a warm up and then we'd throw around for a while and then maybe we'd play a scrimmage. Yeah.
That sounds fun and also similar to at least some of the college practices that I went to, which is pretty funny. That was around, I think, 2010, but
Yep.
I think by 2013 you were going to European Championships. So explain a little bit about what happened over those next 3 years, maybe what teams you played and how your motivations changed, or if they changed, regarding Ultimate Frisbee.
So let's see. So going to those Monday evening practices were great, but then I was kind of bummed or disappointed that there weren't really many other opportunities to play, or that I was just playing once a week and it didn't seem like very much. And I'm also I overschedule myself all the time. And by, one activity a week didn't seem like enough at all. And I was like, I need to do something else. So then I randomly heard about another Ultimate Frisbee team that was being formed on our campus. So the campus where I was at. And they didn't have a team name yet, but ended up being called the Flying Penguins. And so I found out about that through one of my engineering friends, and she brought me to practice once, and like 5 guys were there and she and I were there. So, like less than 10 people on this old windy field with a bunch of holes all over the place. So we just started practicing there, and that was every Wednesday. And then I think through, when did I find out about this other practice? The University of Brussels would practice on Friday nights. And my college town was about an hour away from Brussels. And what seemed to be happening, at least when I first went to college, was that everybody who could would go home to their parents on the weekend, every single weekend. And so the town just became a ghost town on the weekends. And I thought, well, I guess I'll do this too. And so I heard about the practices of the Brussels University happening, and I showed up at one of those, and they were playing on this clay field. So it wasn't any type of surface that I've ever played on again, or like before then, thank goodness. But it was just bizarre. And so it was, poorly lit. Half the field was lit. It was really the kind of the backside of some sports facility, but I ended up forming some friendships there that I still have now and that I really value a lot. And so I ended up practicing in this, gym on Monday nights, and then Wednesday was the flying penguin practice on my campus on the muddy field with holes, and then Friday night was the clay field with the Brussels University. So I was doing a lot of that for a couple years. And during that time, as I formed connections with the folks practicing at those locations, people started inviting me to tournaments. And so in Europe, tournaments are mostly unsanctioned, and they're just fun tournaments. You put a group of friends together, and then you travel to a place like Italy or France or somewhere else in Belgium, and then you play in the tournament and you drink a lot most of the time. And so I started going to those, and I think just most of that was playing open and with, a few women on the field, mostly guys. If we were playing mixed, I would get picked to complement a mixed team that didn't have enough women usually. And so through that, I met more and more of the Belgian ultimate frisbee community, and I was just playing constantly. I was playing all the time. So I think you said 2013, I guess that was when okay. So then the European Beach Championships were coming up in 2013. They were taking place in Spain, and my ultimate story is very complicated. Very chaotic. This person, Fred, she was putting together a women's team to go to this championship, and she played at the sports club where I had initially started. So that sports club was in Brussels, and I think she reached out to me and there were some other women who I had started to play with, who I met through the various practices I was going to, that said, hey, they're, having a little selection evening, or a tryout evening, this day. I think you should come. So I went, and then, there were about as many people who showed up at the tryouts who needed to be on a team. So everybody was taken for the team, and we traveled to Spain to play in these European championships, and it was I got a really bad sunburn on my lower lip, which was pretty bad.
Oh no.
And then that I remember distinctly, and it was just overall a good experience. I feel we didn't play particularly well, and we certainly didn't have a good result at the end, but that was my first competitive sanctioned experience, I think.
Cool. Well, yeah, that was in 2013, I believe you said, Beach European Championships. But I think 2 years later, you made the women's national team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about that. What did that process look like for you?
Something additional that I wanted to mention is that throughout all those years of playing ultimate, there was no type of weightlifting whatsoever. Nobody went to the gym. I think I knew one person who talked about going to the gym a fair amount, but that was it. It was kind of embarrassing to go to the gym. Like, oh, it's a dude's thing. It's an American thing. Like, whatever. Don't want to get too muscular if you're a woman, which is ridiculous. And as a result, I think that what am I saying? So that was an interesting part of ultimate that I discovered more here, because I had never really been to a gym before moving to the US 4 years ago. But anyway, so going into 2015, the European Championships in Denmark were happening, and Belgium put together women's tryouts that I think lasted one day. Maybe 30 women showed up. 25 were selected. It wasn't very difficult to get chosen for the team. But at that point, that's the first time where there was any mention of a physical preparation for competition. So Ella, one of the players on the team, led, like put together this fitness program that we were supposed to follow. And it was the first time that I ever did anything like that. And I tried to follow it. It didn't involve, it was a lot of body weight things, just assuming that people didn't have weights at home. Didn't require any type of equipment. A lot of running, intervals. Yeah, but that was kind of paired with, so we were having practices for the national team maybe once every 2 months or so. And then on the side, I just kept playing with all my teams. I kept playing with my college teams and then going to fun tournaments and stuff. So there was just a lot of ultimate all the time, whether it was serious or not serious. Well, mostly not serious, I guess. The only serious ultimate was the national team.
Well, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. And then when was the competition for that national team? Was that the one in London?
No. Well, so that national team went to Copenhagen in Denmark in 2015.
Okay.
And then the following year, they had tryouts again. More women showed up. I made the selection again. And we went to London in 2016. And it's really expensive to travel as a young person who's in college to those types of competitions. And so part of the team chose to stay in a house, and I chose to be on a campsite next to a river with my partner at the time, and then a bunch of other buddies from the Mooncatchers team, who are also competing with the national teams in the men's division. And yeah, so that was a whole experience in itself. And London actually got rained out quite a bit. They had junior championships right before the adult championships, and they had to bring in helicopters to empty water out of the fields. It was so bad. And then then it rained a lot during our week too, to the point where our campsite got flooded, and the neighboring team who was in the campsite saved all our stuff from this from this rising river that just ended up overflowing our campsite, and our campsite just transformed into a lake of sorts. And so all the people from the other team, when we weren't there, just dragged all our stuff up this little hill, so that it was out of the water. So that was kind of an interesting anecdote. But yeah, so that was the competition we were preparing for. Another aspect I might add is that Belgium has two linguistic regions, the northern region being Flemish or Dutch speaking, and then the southern region is French speaking. And I want to say that more finance is given to sports in the Dutch region, and the majority of the national team women players, and men players actually, were Flemish speaking. And so being on the team as a French speaker was challenging because there were three of us. And so those were my close friends, and we would kind of, stick together. And one of them speaks really good Dutch. So she would interact with the Dutch speakers, but it was challenging having that linguistic barrier. So there was a lot of English speaking. I was lucky enough to know English pretty well. But that was an added challenge, I think, to being on the national team.
Yeah, that does sound like a challenge, and I don't know, at least here in Minnesota, if that's a challenge that a lot of, at least the people I've interacted with, end up having to deal with when they play teams here in Minnesota. I know playing teams from Canada and then elsewhere around the world that it has been a challenge, but here in Minnesota, I don't know. At least, yeah, like I said, the people I've interacted with, that if that has ended up being a challenge. So after these championship tournaments that you ended up playing in around Europe, you ended up to come to the United States. Would you briefly just what was the motivation for the move? And then was Ultimate like on your radar immediately when you made it to the US, or was that kind of like an afterthought?
Great question. I moved to the US because I had a professional opportunity to do research on 3D printing heart valves at the Mayo Clinic.
Cool.
In Rochester. And it sounded like a neat opportunity for me to add something pretty significant to my resume and also work abroad for a year. The contract was supposed to be 1 year initially. And Ultimate was on my radar immediately, mostly because I don't know how else to meet people. And that's always kind of how I've formed friendships. And so I looked at Facebook groups, I looked at the websites, I found the Dragon Thrust website, I found a bunch of Facebook groups, but unfortunately those were all up in the Twin Cities and I was down in Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
So Rochester, I think I found one Facebook group that was fairly inactive and didn't have very many people on it. And there didn't seem to be an actual team. So I was a bit disappointed about that. But I thought, well, I'm moving to the US. It seems like everybody has cars there. So I'm going to get a car. And plus, that'll enable me to drive back and forth from Rochester to the Twin Cities a lot to play Ultimate. So when I moved here, I bought a car, very cheap car that I still have, but that is probably shouldn't be driven anymore. And then I was in Rochester, but traveling up to the Twin Cities probably 2 or 3 times a week for Ultimate. And I think the first event I went to in the Twin Cities or in the US for Ultimate was a women's pickup evening at a dome in the wintertime.
Cool. So it seems like you tried integrating yourself into the Ultimate community right away. You had a lot of experience playing Ultimate in Europe and around Europe, and then you came to the United States and started playing Ultimate. What are were there any major differences that you noticed between Ultimate in the US and Ultimate in Europe, and what were those differences?
Yeah, quite a few differences. I'd say the most notable being the fitness of the players. Like really powerful women, really muscular, really fit, and quick and fast and talented female players showed up at that first dome pickup night that I went to. And that was really impressive to me because the only exposure I had to that was the national team back home. And, when I wasn't playing on the national team, which honestly wasn't very often, I would be playing with my clubs, but those were mostly guys and there were a few women here and there. But so that was really impressive and really empowering, I think, to see. Another aspect that, oh my gosh, there were the rule differences too. So in Europe, I had always played with WFDF rules, and here they were applying USA Ultimate rules even in pickup. And so I remember distinctly the pull going past the brick mark, and I was bringing it back to the brick mark automatically, but then somebody on the field here told me, no, what are you doing? Why are you bringing the disc backwards back to the brick mark? And so then I figured, okay, well, oops, I totally forgot that they have different rules slightly. So that was another difference. And then the physicality of the play as well. In Europe, there's a lot of, I'd say, how to say, people just don't engage in physical contact at all, if possible. And they, if you are standing your ground and another player bumps into you in Belgium, somebody would call foul for that automatically. Whereas here, there's a lot more lenience in that, and you use your body to, box somebody out or, get in their way or try to get to the disc first or just position your body in a way that they can't come through you. So that was I found that quite intimidating because it wasn't something that I was used to at all. And I never played like that. So it took me like years, I think, to feel more comfortable with standing my ground and really putting my body in a way that was going to help me defend, especially on defense, actually. So that was another difference. Trying to think. I was used to seeing a lot of hammers being thrown, and a lot of kind of goofy blades and stuff like that, especially in indoor play. And so I felt like in those pickup nights, people, or I guess the first impression was that people were a bit more conservative with their throws versus in Belgium where it's just kind of all over the place. And then there were also no beers on the sidelines really at those evenings. Whereas, at actual club practice in Belgium, people would be having beers, smoking pot, and smoking cigarettes. And so there was that too.
Wow. Well, I think it's amazing that your European experience, especially during pickup, you said had more hammers and blades. I feel like if pickup begins here again soon, we're going to have to up our game with hammers and blades and bad decisions. Maybe I think that'd be a lot of fun. Now, I don't want to downplay the time and the experiences you had playing as a player in the United States, because I think the 4 years you played here, you accomplished quite a bit. But I do want to have some time to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Strike. So maybe just to catch up to 2019, 2020, can you give a brief overview of what your ultimate in the U.S. looked like, as well as I think you were at the 2018 WUCC tournament as well?
So let's see. Well, for the 2018 tournament, well, I guess, okay. So from moving to the US until now, I realized and learned a lot about weightlifting, about off-season versus on-season training, about training that didn't involve running, that I really knew nothing about. And that made a really big difference, I think, especially as my body gets older, really made a difference in preventing injury, and getting faster and feeling more confident in what my body could do. And also just, I think, getting faster than I was. So that completely changed my mindset on physical conditioning, whether it's, training for ultimate and now during COVID, just staying sane and, still wanting to have that feel of, pushing yourself pretty hard at a workout, but, and it hurts during the workout, but then it feels really great when you're done with it. So I kind of became pretty, I don't know, I really loved it. I mean, when I was down in Rochester, I found this program where I was going in to train 3 times a week at 6 a.m. And I don't think there's anything else that I would wake up that early for. And it was brutal, but it was also real, felt really great. And I felt like I had a plan, and somebody was planning the workouts for me. And so I was really lucky to have that opportunity down there. And let's see, what was the other question? Oh, and so then rolling around, I guess, to 2019, 2020, or 2018, sorry, the World Club Championships, I knew that the Flying Rabbits, a mixed team from Brussels, were going to play in that championship. And I asked them if they needed people on the team at all. I think I asked the women's team first. That was going to be coming from Belgium, and they didn't need anybody additional, which was totally fine. And then unfortunately, the Flying Rabbits had some last minute injuries. And since I was already here in the US and just kind of available at that time, they took me onto the team as a handler. And that was during my season with Dragon, so that was 2018. And that was a bit of a difficult transition just because I was playing as a cutter for Dragon Thrust and suddenly being put into a role as a handler with a team that I hadn't really played with all that much before. But that being said, the experience was really great to be able to play with them. And I feel really lucky that they, took me on to their team for that. And then after that, I got to spend some time road tripping in the US with a couple Belgian friends. So that was really special to me, to get that little piece of home, kind of come over here and, have the experience of the US with me. So that was really fun. And yeah, I guess I feel like, well, COVID notwithstanding, I feel like I really improved on a variety of levels in ultimate, especially concerning making smarter decisions on the field and prioritizing conditioning, physical conditioning.
Cool.
For the game.
Yeah. So that brings us to, I guess, pre-COVID, just pre-COVID. And I wanted to ask a few questions about Minnesota Strike, because you're one of the co-founders of the Minnesota Strike team. And I think the first question to start off with is, how did that process start? How did you go from being a person who plays Ultimate in Minnesota to becoming a co-founder of the Minnesota Strike?
Thanks for asking that question. It has been quite a journey, and will continue to be for quite some time, I hope. At the time, so this was probably 2019, let's see, probably June of 2019, I had just gotten turned down from playing on Dragon, and that was a pretty hard emotional hit because I played the year before, and I know you and I talked a little bit at that time. Emotionally, that was pretty tough, and really just hard to not take personally. I think tryouts in general are a fairly brutal experience, both physically and mentally, I find. Also, side note, there are no tryouts ever in Belgium. So that was a whole new thing to me when I showed up here. It was, that was really interesting. But yeah, Belgium only had vague tryouts for national teams. Probably a bit more serious now, but so at that time, my partner at the time had been selected to play on Minnesota Wind Chill, which was and still is the men's professional team here in the Twin Cities. And I was excited for him, also extremely jealous, and just frustrated. Why didn't that opportunity exist for me? And why was there only a men's team? And so I was just kind of brewing and just being frustrated and jealous, and seeing him go off and play his games. And I was like, well, I mean, I could sit here and be mad about it, or I could just do something about it and try to do something about it. So that's when I think I posted in a Facebook group, wondering if anything had been done to found a women's team here in the Twin Cities, because I didn't want to duplicate efforts. And then Chip Chang, Dr. Chip Chang, chimed in and said that didn't seem like there were any initiatives on the Minnesota side, but that she had some contacts for Angela Lynn, who was and who still is a member of the PUL board, Premier Ultimate League. And so then Anna Hagstrom at that point reached out to me, and I had never heard of Anna before in my life. I'd never spoken to her, and she sent me a private message on Facebook and asked me, told me that she was really interested in this idea, and if I was willing, she wanted to have a part in it and wanted to be able to help out. And so I had no clue what I was doing. I could, I wanted to take all the help that I could possibly get. And so I said yes. And then, our partnership began there. And so we started talking on the phone quite a bit. And one of the first steps was contacting Angela Lynn and wondering what might be the first steps in forming a pro team to be part of the Premier Ultimate League. And then so Anna and I were talking a lot on the phone, deciding what next steps were, what had to be done. Anna has a tremendous amount of experience in entrepreneurship and just business management in general, and is also a lawyer and a mom, and she's just amazing all around, incredible individual. And so she really, there's no way I could have done this without her, that's for sure. And so she and I worked a lot on it throughout the summer of 2019, and then submitted our application to the Premier Ultimate League, I think in September of 2019. And it was, a 40-page document of various amounts of information of, what stadium options we had, what was our budget, how are we doing fundraising, what our sponsors might be, what prominent players were in our area who might be interested in playing on the roster. So that was a lot of work. And then also forming the business entity was an important step for Strike. Strike being an LLC, so limited liability corporation company. Sure. But Anna did a lot of that legwork, or most of it, and is now sole owner of that business entity, and I'm a co-founder. And at that period in our lives, that felt like a pretty logical step. I didn't feel like I was ready to take ownership of a business, and she wanted to take that risk. So that I felt like that worked out pretty well that way. And yeah, it's just constant pushing forward, what needs to be done next, what needs to be thought about, just like constant little things to think about in terms of what needs to be done to make this project work, and thinking of, if we can do this, if we can really pull this off, that means that, young women and female presenting players can play for this team, and not be sidelined when somebody or one of their friends is off playing for the Minnesota Wind Chill and they're wondering, why on earth can't I do this either? So the hope was to really create that opportunity for future players and current players. So then 2020 rolled around. That was going to be our inaugural season. All know what happened there. It was really disappointing because a lot of money was raised, plane tickets were being booked, stadiums were being reserved. There was just a lot of work that all came crumbling down and was just erased because of this pandemic. So that was a big deal. I think of all years that the pandemic could have happened, it would have been nice if it happened like 5 years from now, but that's a very selfish outlook, obviously. And so we just kind of moved forward and tried to get past the mental hurdle of the pandemic happening. So we still haven't played any games.
Right. Well, I mean, from a fan and a supporter of the Strike, from the outside looking in, the team being built and getting ready for what was going to be the 2020 season, everything looked really, really great, really, really fun. I and a lot of other people were very, very excited. Then, of course, COVID happened, and inaugural season was not to occur. And I know things are very much in flux, so I have a two-part question for you. Looking forward into 2021. Number one, are there any plans that you can share with us as far as the Minnesota Strike, and maybe like possibilities or hopes of something playing or other activities that might occur? And the second part, is there any way to continue to support the Minnesota Strike as we continue to go through this pandemic?
Those are both really good questions. To answer the first one, I know that the league, so I'm no longer a part of the board of directors of the Premier Ultimate League because the PUL restructured its board to hire a more diverse staff. And so I stepped down, and a number of other team co-founders and owners stepped down as well. And I know the Premier Ultimate League is trying really hard to work on its racial equity standpoint and outlook in terms of, what we can do as a relatively young organization to make sure that we're playing Ultimate Frisbee in a way that is racially equitable and socially equitable and making it accessible to as many people as possible. And that is on the forefront of the PUL's mind. And this return to play question is really complex because, yes, there's the hope that everybody will be vaccinated by May or end of May or whatever the date is. But a lot of people think that's also unrealistic and that there will be an uneven and inequitable distribution of the vaccines. And so that, circles back to the question of how how in a conscious or being as conscious as possible of inequities within our community and not only the ultimate community, but just the overall community. How do we get back to play in a way that's respectful of that? So I don't really have a great answer for that. I mean, obviously, I think, people do want to play and people do want to see the P-Well play. I just don't know if it's going to happen. And I can't even say that from my standpoint, if it did happen, that it would be a good idea. And so I know that the PUL has been asking for feedback from the players who were supposed to be rostered or who were rostered last year, and feedback from the teams, and is going to make a decision, I would assume, in the upcoming months. But it's still very uncertain, so that's about as much as I can share at this point.
Yeah, and I know it's all in flux. Is there any way that people can currently support the Minnesota Strike? Even if play doesn't end up happening in 2021.
Yes, there are a couple ways, but as always, you can visit our website. I know that we still have some gear that is available to be sold, so that's always a good way to financially support the team. We are looking to host some more webinars. There was a webinar that we hosted on with Minnesota Ultimate. I think it was on Wednesday. Yes, yep. Wednesday evening, and featured Women for Political Change. So we're trying to make this a somewhat of a regular event. I would say maybe 3 or 4 times a year is the hope. But each time featuring a local organization that is advocating for, political change, racial equity, and social equity. And so that is one way, signing up and supporting those events is another way, I guess. And then signing up to our newsletter and liking our page on Facebook and following us on Instagram and on Twitter are kind of the general ones, the classic ones, I would say. But yeah, I guess just stay tuned for any future play. If there is any. I can't guarantee any for this year. I don't think anybody can guarantee anything, honestly. It's very complicated, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really great information, and I hope people listening can, hopefully by the time this comes out, there's maybe a little bit more information about what 2021 might look like. But regardless, now listeners know how to help support the Minnesota Strike, especially during a time like this. We are running out of time, so I have just one more question. You have played Ultimate across continents and a lot of different areas, so I want to kind of give you the opportunity just to give any shout outs or draw the listeners' attention to anything that you think might be important, or any thanks you want to say, just regarding your experiences with Ultimate.
That's a great question. Or do you mean like a person in particular, or several people in particular, or just things?
I guess I'd leave it up to you. I like to give you an opportunity just to like have an open mic and say thanks or draw attention to something if you would like.
Well, I want to thank, the first thing that comes to mind is I want to thank Anna Hagstrom for her work on strike, and for being just absolutely amazing all the time, and just incessantly impressive to me. I also want to acknowledge that I feel really lucky to be able to play the sport. I haven't ever had any significant financial barriers, or, yes, I'm a woman, and there are some cases where I think that there could have been more women on the field and more opportunities for women to play, but I feel really grateful to be able-bodied and to, be able to run around on the field. So that's something that I think I took for granted a lot, and that I'm able to reflect on a bit more now, in my slightly wiser late 20 years. And I want to, I don't know, I think the Ultimate community has been very gracious to me, and in various countries, I'm thinking of Peru specifically. I went on an exchange program for 6 months in Peru, and Ultimate Frisbee was something that was able to be consistent even over there, where they had a small Ultimate team, and I was able to go play with them. And those connections that are formed through sports are really, really special to me. So I value those a lot. Yeah, I also want to acknowledge that the Ultimate Frisbee community is very white anywhere, and is also extremely white in Belgium. And so I want to acknowledge that, and I want to continue to push for racial equity within the Ultimate community, especially because I feel like I can, that's a community where I can make a little bit of a difference. But yeah.
Yeah, well, Eva, I think everything you just said is very important. So thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for sitting down and just sharing your Ultimate experience today. It's been very fun to listen to, and it's not an Ultimate experience that a lot of people in Minnesota would have. So I really appreciate you sitting down and just taking the time to chat.
No problem, James. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. The History of Ultimate in Minnesota podcast is a project run by volunteers, hoping to spotlight amazing stories of Ultimate in Minnesota. If you are interested in helping out, please visit minnesotaultimate.org. A huge thanks for this episode goes out to Eva Maxson for the interview, Minnesota Ultimate, and discdish.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time with more History of Ultimate in Minnesota.